Have you ever noticed how nothing is your fault? Me too. Because traffic, timing, other people, bad luck, there's always a reason. There's always an explanation and always an excuse. And for a while, this feels true to us. But the uncomfortable reality is that every excuse that we make is quietly lowering our standards. Not all at once, just enough so that you don't notice who you're slowly becoming. And today we're going to be calling that out in this episode. We're going to be stepping back into a new phase about raising our personal standards. And it starts with the one thing that people avoid at all costs: ownership. Because the moment you stop blaming everything else around you is the exact moment that your life starts to change. But before we get into this episode, if you're a fan of honest conversations about success and transformation and the kind that aren't polished, that aren't comfortable, and happen when nobody is watching, you are in the right place. Because at Habitual Growth, we don't sugarcoat it. We don't outsource our responsibility, and we definitely don't let ourselves off of the hook. So if you're ready to drop the excuses and to raise your standards, then listen up. You're in the right place. And hey, if you don't hit that subscribe button, don't worry. I'm sure you've got a really good excuse for that too. All right, let's get to it. To another weekly episode of the Habitual Growth Podcast. I am Nate. As always, we've got my co-host Lisa here with us in the studio before she has to travel abroad for some work stuff. So we're going to miss her while she's gone, but probably be a little bit more productive maybe, huh?
Hey. It'll be a whole lot
But
less fun.
what is exciting about what we're talking about today is we're actually going into a new topic. So if you've been following us for a while, you've been subscribing, thank you. We're putting the clarity before intensity umbrella topic behind us, and we're going to start moving into raising your standards. And today, specifically, we're going to be talking about ownership over excuses and what that does for the individual and why that is so important. And so really to kick this off, Lisa, one of the things that really jumps out to me is kind of how, you and I have shared about battling our own egos in the past. And really what that means is excuses are there to protect the ego. And once you are able to move those excuses to the side and put your ego to the side, you really start to build yourself internally. And a lot of gurus out there in this space, in the personal development, personal growth space, talk about ego. They talk about the person. They talk about, pursuing personal excellence, but they don't actually talk about why that is really important. And the core reason for that is when you focus on yourself, when you become selfish about your own personal growth, you are actually taking ownership of what happens in your life, and you are developing yourself as a person, and you are removing your ego so that you can ultimately go out there, pursue the life that you want, and also build the community, build the lifestyle, build the family that you have always dreamed about. So what does that mean to you at first blush?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people, they hear the word ego and they're like, well, that's not me, which then is probably your ego talking. But when you say that, excuses are really about your ego, to me, that means, that you're not able to see the reality of what's happening, right? If you can't be honest with yourself and say, man, I have some work to do in this area, or I keep repeating this habit that I've developed and it's not serving me. But instead of just saying, oh, it's not that bad, or, I think it's getting better, or I'll deal with that tomorrow. It's having the ability to look inward and face the reality of where you're at and remove some of the sugarcoating, right? Because you can't grow as a person to the greatest extent possible unless you know exactly where you're starting from and are honest with yourself about that.
Yeah. And I know personally when I started this personal growth journey, right? It's been accelerating because we have the app, we're doing it on a daily basis. We're writing our essential action list, tying it to our goals, all the things that we talk about consistently here. But really what it started out as is I had to look internally and say, gosh, this is just not the life that I wanted to live. Like, even if I wasn't happy, even if it was an okay life, it was just okay to me. And I remember specifically having to really focus on my mindset. And I used to say, gosh, why did this happen to me? Or, man, of course things are going to go wrong. And of course it's this other person's fault, instead of what can I do next? What can I change about the situation? What can I perceive differently in this? How do I force myself to look at the positive instead of the negative? But that really took a lot of shelving of my ego. I really had to strip that away and say, okay, I'm not going to make excuses anymore. Even if my day doesn't go according to plan, even if I don't have the life that I want to live right now, I can make changes. And it really does start with that mental process of just pushing the ego aside, eliminating those excuses, and just understanding what I can do in that current situation that betters that situation.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, we even fail to recognize that how much our ego puts us in a victim state, right? Because it easily defers whatever is happening to something outside of your control. So you talk about, hey, I learned that I could take control and, even if there was external things that, were happening, what could I do? And that's where the ego comes in, where it deflects and says, it's not your fault. This is happening to you because, or you couldn't have seen that coming, or well, this habit really is nice because it helps you, feel relaxed every night or whatever it is. And so it defers the ownership and accountability from you to someone or something else so that you are less likely to take accountability and change action, which is hard, right? Your brain is hardwired to keep you comfortable, but change and hard is required in the personal growth journey.
100%. And that's a perfect example of letting your standard slip. We talk about standard. If you've been in the space for a long time, you understand that most people will say that there's a very hard line, right? Andy Frisella is notorious for saying basically, like, if you cut any quarter, you're going to start to cut more corners. And so there are no excuses, right? But really behind that statement is tolerance, right? Your standards are proven by what you tolerate. You're unhappy in a relationship, but you're tolerating that person because you're too scared to have the conversation. You don't like your job, you're barely getting by, but you're not even taking the time to brush up on your public speaking skills or work on your resume or sit down and every night, go, maybe join a Facebook group for networking or reach out to people on LinkedIn. Like, there's always things that you can do. There's always opportunity out there. And by doing nothing, what you're telling yourself internally is, I'm going to tolerate my experience. I'm going to tolerate this thing happening to me, instead of saying, I'm not going to tolerate this. I'm going to do something about it. Even if that thing is small, you're still telling yourself internally and mentally, by doing something, I'm not going to accept that standard that I have historically done.
Yeah, and I think if people haven't done this exercise before, I would encourage them to do this, which is take 1 week and really listen and watch people. So go about your day to day and listen and watch for what people say compared to what they do. And then do that for an entire week. And I would be willing to bet at least 80% of the time they do not match. It's pretty common, unfortunately, nowadays. And then take the next week and observe yourself. How many times do you say something and then your actions or behaviors are not aligned with that? And that will give you some idea, one, of how common it is, and then also how much you do it as well. And then start to build into your essential actions list small things that you can tweak so that you become into greater alignment between what you're saying and what you're doing.
That's perfect. And I 100% agree with that. And as you were kind of sharing that, I was thinking about what we talked about last week, right? When we were running at 30 before intensity, when we were talking about preparation diminishes pressure, right? And in those situations, what it reminded me of was, I've pitched businesses a lot, right? It's part of my job. I go out and I have to ask people for money or partnerships or whatever it is, sell people into things. And when situations don't go right, I used to say, screw those people, whatever, they didn't see the vision. I'm off to the next one. Now I actually step back and I say, well, did I really nail that? Did I understand my audience? Did I make the connective tissue? Maybe I gave them wrong numbers. Maybe I was tired and I wasn't awake because I didn't sleep well the night before, right? But it becomes an internal conversation of like, okay, instead of an excuse, what did I learn? How can I better prepare? Because that is a perfect example of two things. One, are you prepared, right? Are you able to handle the
Yes, that's your
pressure?
point.
But then two, are you tolerating the minimal effort you put into something that didn't result in a sale or a partnership or whatever it was, right? And that's a really key question. So I like what you said, because you're then taking that ownership, you're putting it on your daily action list, and you're saying, okay, it is essential for me to get better at this thing. So I'm going to put in those intentional reps like we talked about last time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think another, maybe easy is in air quotes, thing that people can do to help kind of understand where they're at is pick an area in your life where you want to set a minimum bar, right? And set it for a week or 2 weeks. and then really watch and take evaluation of how many times you fell below that bar.
Hmm.
Because we also in our minds kind of go, it's not that bad. I really only slipped a little bit. I generally hold the standard when it comes to this for myself. But the reality is sometimes we all need a gut check to say what's actually happening. So when you start to define, here's my minimum standard, also build in periodic checks for yourself so that you can actually know the reality of what you're making decisions on.
Yeah, 100%. And that is perfect because that is going to do a couple of things. One, it's going to give you a baseline,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Two, it is going to change your standards. And right before we jumped on this, I was actually watching this clip. We're going to bring somebody up from the podcast who actually went to Alex Hormozi's summit, and he is in a clip of asking Alex this question.
That's
Um,
cool.
and what was cool about it is basically he was asking, "Hey, I want to get to this amount of revenue, but I don't know if I want to sacrifice that time with my family." And Alex's response, more or less, was, "Well, there's always a trade off, right? So, what is the cost of what you're giving up for the reward?" And I'm not going to get into the clip, but basically, his point was, if you want to change your standard, whether that's revenue, whether that's time with your family, or whether that's freedom to, have an open schedule, right? Whatever that is, there is a trade-off of work that needs to go in, right? It's time, it's resources, it's money. What can you make up on the back end versus what are you willing to tolerate now? And I bring that up because of what you said. One, you're tracking that baseline, but two, you're also understanding what you're willing to tolerate, and you're also understanding what that is going to do for your personal standards. Like if my standard is I want to go have complete financial freedom, well, guess what? That doesn't come easy. I'm probably going to have to put in 10 years of really hard work to get to that point. Is that worth it to spend less time with my family? That's a personal question people are going to have to answer for themselves. But the point is, think about it in that way because the cost of something isn't always easy up front, but in the
Right.
long term, it may actually get you to where you want to go. And you may say that trade off is the thing that I'm looking for.
Yeah, actually, it's funny you bring that clip up. So, two things. One, I think that's an important thing when you do the exercise that I was talking about earlier, where you observe what you say and what you actually do. Because what a lot of people will find is that they say one thing, they do something different, but it's because they don't actually want what they say they want. So, that's a great exercise to really understand, is that what you want? And that is a personal, response to your earlier point. And it's funny, I referenced a conversation with my coach in our last podcast, and I'll bring it back because the next part of the conversation that he and I talked about was, if you want to achieve this goal, it's going to take X, and it's going to be, really dialing in your diet, like you are going to be, there's no like room for fluff. So you get the diet component, you are always, strength training at this pace and, blah, blah, blah. And he had a list of like 5 things. And I said, okay, well, I travel a lot for work and I need to back out the timing and figure it out. And he goes, there's no balance. Either you're in or you're out. And he's like, it's a trick, and he's like, you might have that as an excuse in your mind, but you're going to have to manage that. And you're going to have to add in all these things to be able to achieve what you want to achieve. Is that still what you want to do? And I was like, oh, okay, well, yes, yes, but it's a good gut check because you're right. And his point was there's no such thing as balance. It's give and take. It's what's the trade-off and what's the goal or the end outcome worth to me? And then making what you say is your end goal or your outcome aligned with your action so that you can actually achieve it.
Yeah, I love that. I love it. Well, we're going to leave it there. That was a high note.
Awesome.
Audience, thank you for watching. If you've followed us for a while, share this with somebody else that you think may need it. We've got a really awesome series here around raising your standards. This is just the first content session around that. We're going to be keeping it going for the next couple of weeks. And of course, as always, make sure you go and download the Habitual Growth app and start using it, especially in the way that Lisa described, right? Really figure out your personal standards. Understand how raising your standards has a greater input than just financial or one aspect of your life. It touches every single thing that you do. And so, as we talk about the ownership around the examples today, keep that in mind. But make sure you go out there and make a change for the better. Like, subscribe, and share this with somebody that you love. With that, Lisa,
Awesome.
I hope you enjoy your trip, and we will
Thank you.
see you
Thank you.
when you get back.
Sounds good. Thanks, Nate.
All right.